What if the love of your life isn't saving you, but devouring you? What if the woman you call your soulmate, your safe space, your muse, isn't who you think she is? Worse, what if she never was? A man who does not see the dark side of woman, Carl Jung once warned, is not in love, he is in danger. We begin with a heresy. In today's spiritual Disneyland of divine femininity, female empowerment, goddess energy, and TikTok therapists telling you to worship her as the queen she is, no one wants to hear this. But Jung was not a prophet of comfort. He didn't sell bedtime stories. He unearthed nightmares you needed to meet. And one of the most terrifying was this: the feminine is not always love. Sometimes she is chaos, not the loud masculine chaos of war and fire, but the quiet chaos of seduction, projection, and annihilation masked as intimacy. Let's talk about the anima. In Jungian psychology, every man carries a feminine part within his unconscious. This inner feminine, the anima, is not just an archetype. She is a filter, a blueprint, a whispering voice shaping how he sees women, and more importantly, how he sees himself through them. The anima can appear as the nurturing mother, the seductive lover, the spiritual muse, or the dark siren. She lives not in the real woman, but in the man's fantasy of her. And this fantasy, it's deadly. Because when a man hasn't integrated his own anima, hasn't faced his inner feminine, he doesn't fall in love with a woman. He falls in love with a projection. Let's say this clearly. A man can be passionately in love with a woman who isn't even there. She becomes his mirror, his redeemer, his escape hatch from the chaos of the masculine world. And for a while, it feels divine. She gets him. She calms his storms. She carries his dreams like a priestess bearing a sacred chalice. But then something shifts. She becomes colder, more unpredictable. Maybe she pulls away, maybe she punishes him with silence, or worse, she stays sweet while slowly draining his will to live. He doesn't understand, so he tries harder, loves harder, sacrifices more. But the more he gives, the more he disappears. Not because she's evil, but because she was never meant to carry his unconscious in the first place. Jung knew this trap well. He saw it again and again in his patients. Men suffering not from heartbreak, but from self-erasure. They had not been loved. They had been consumed. And why? Because they refused to look at the dark side of the feminine that manipulates, that withholds, that wounds not with knives, but with glances. The feminine that doesn't yell, but whispers just enough to make you question your sanity. This is the shadow feminine. And most men will do anything to pretend she doesn't exist. Why? Because to admit she exists is to admit he projected something holy onto something human. Let me offer you a metaphor. You're walking through a forest at night. You see a glowing light, warm, golden, otherworldly. You follow it thinking it's a guiding angel. But it's not. It's a will-o'-the-wisp, a trick of the swamp. And by the time you realize it's not leading you home, it's too late. You're already lost. This is what happens when a man confuses the anima with reality. When he mistakes the feminine image in his psyche for the woman in front of him. He loves her not for who she is, but for what she reflects. His mother, his fantasy, his longing, his wound. And when that mirror shatters, he doesn't just mourn the relationship, he mourns the illusion he built his identity on. So here's the first uncomfortable truth. A man who worships woman without confronting her shadow does not love her. He consumes her or is consumed by her. This isn't misogyny. This isn't incel rage. This is psychology. This is myth. This is the death of fantasy and the birth of actual love, but only if the man dares to see the dark. Let's imagine a man. He sees her across the room, or maybe he meets her on a dating app. She's beautiful, but not just physically. There's something else, something intoxicating, like deja vu mixed with destiny. Like a dream he's been trying to remember his whole life. She smiles, he's gone. What just happened? Jung would tell you, he didn't fall in love with her. He fell in love with his own unconscious, projected onto her body like a film on a blank screen. This is the anima in action. She is not the woman. She is what the woman awakens in him. The anima is the inner feminine that every man carries within him. She is born from his earliest impressions of womanhood. His mother, his first crush, the feminine energies that shaped his psyche. She isn't rational, she's not even personal, she's archetypal. At her highest, she is wisdom, soul, divine inspiration. At her lowest, she is obsession, illusion, seduction, and emotional chaos. The man doesn't see the woman, he sees his missing half, his salvation, his emotional home. But here's the tragedy. The more unconscious the man is of his own anima, the more likely he is to confuse fantasy with reality. Here's how it unfolds. He meets her. She feels familiar in a strange, almost mystical way. He tells himself, she gets me. She's not like other girls. It's like we've known each other forever. No, what he means is, she matches the internal image of the feminine I've carried all my life. She reflects the part of me I've never dared to meet. This projection is powerful, overwhelming. It can cause the most logical, stoic men to lose their center. They call it passion. They call it fate. But in reality, it's psychological possession. Jung called it being seized by the archetype. The man no longer has thoughts about her. He is consumed by visions of her. Everything she does becomes symbolic, every word a secret message, every silence a test. She becomes mythologized, a goddess. And like all goddesses, she demands sacrifice, time, autonomy, identity, purpose. He gives it all, gladly. Because in his unconscious mind, this isn't just a woman. This is a portal to transcendence. She is going to complete him. But what happens when she pulls away? What happens when she says something cruel, or worse, indifferent? What happens when she cheats? Leaves, or just stops being the fantasy? The man doesn't just lose her. He experiences something much worse. Ego death. Because she didn't just hold his affection, she held his sense of wholeness. And when she walks away, it feels like he is the one who disappears. This is where the anima becomes destructive. Not because the woman is cruel, but because the man never saw her clearly. He placed the crown of divinity on her head, and now he must either take it off or watch her crush him under the weight of it. This is why Jung insisted, the man who has not faced his anima will be possessed by her. Let's pause here for a moment and ground this in reality. You've probably known someone like this. Maybe you've been him, the guy who can't stop talking about her. Even years later, he still speaks her name like a curse and a prayer at once. He stalks her social media in secret. Every new boyfriend she has is an insult to the fantasy he built. He says things like, "She ruined me. She was my everything. I'll never find another like her." And he's right, not because she was that special, but because no one can ever compete with a projection. Now here's where it gets darker. The woman may even sense it. She may feel that she's being loved for something she isn't. She may try to live up to the fantasy at first, but over time it becomes suffocating. She becomes resentful, confused, or quietly manipulative. She realizes she holds psychological power over him. And if her own shadow is unconscious, she may begin to use it. Not out of malice, but because she's been cast in a role she never auditioned for. This is the tragedy of unconscious love. She becomes a goddess he cannot touch. He becomes a servant who cannot leave. It's not love, it's spiritual addiction. And yet, here's the most terrifying part. The anima isn't trying to destroy him, she's trying to awaken him. She appears, again and again, in relationship after relationship, not to be worshipped, but to lead the man into his own unconscious, to force him to stop seeking salvation in a woman and start seeking wholeness within himself. Only then can he truly see her. Only then is love possible. But most men never get there. They just keep chasing the mirage and dying a little more with every step. Most men think the danger lies in the loud, toxic, manipulative woman, the one who yells, cheats, lies, throws things at the wall. But that's not the real threat. The real threat is quieter, softer. She doesn't raise her voice, she lowers yours. She doesn't chain you. She gives you just enough freedom to believe you're still free. She nurtures you until you forget how to stand on your own. This is the shadow feminine. And when Jung warned about the dark side of woman, this is who he was talking about. Let's break this myth open. Modern culture tends to portray women as natural empaths, intuitive, healing, emotionally intelligent, and yes, they can be. But Jung was far more honest. He saw that just as the masculine has a destructive shadow, war, domination, rage, so too does the feminine. But hers is covert, psychological. Not the sword, but the whisper, the smothering smile, where the dark masculine kills the body, the dark feminine kills the spirit. Quietly, through enmeshment, guilt, emotional dependency. Let's be clear, this is not about blaming women. It's about the forces that live within them and within us all when left unconscious. Until you make the unconscious conscious, Jung wrote, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. The feminine shadow is one of those unconscious forces. It hides behind kindness, seduction, compassion. But underneath, it wants control, not through force, through need. You may have seen it in a relationship where the woman says, I just want to take care of you. You don't have to do anything, just be here. No one will ever love you like I do. It feels warm, safe, addictive. But slowly, you lose your sense of independence. You stop taking risks. You become a version of yourself that is smaller, more agreeable. And if you ever try to pull away, she becomes cold, withdrawn, passive-aggressive. Suddenly, the nurturing disappears, and what's left is psychological blackmail dressed up as love. Jung saw this as part of the Anima's regression into her negative form. When the Anima is rejected, ignored, or unintegrated, she descends. She becomes the siren, the devouring mother, the seductress, the witch. These are not cartoon villains. They are symbolic roles the feminine can take on when she is forced to carry the unconscious wounds of the men around her. The devouring mother, for instance, doesn't scream. She suffocates. She creates a world where the man no longer needs to grow. She handles things. She understands. She wraps him in her approval like a velvet coffin, and he smiles because it feels like love. But it's not love, it's infantilization, and it kills a man's instinct to become. This is what Nietzsche meant when he said, when you look long into the abyss looks into you. The abyss is not always dark and terrifying. Sometimes it looks like comfort, like someone doing your emotional work for you. Let's look at a real-world example. Consider the man who dates the woman who just wants to help him heal. At first, it feels like salvation. She listens, supports, encourages his vulnerability. But over time, it shifts. He begins to feel guilty for being strong. He downplays his ambition so she doesn't feel left behind. He shrinks himself to stay within her emotional range, and if he ever asserts himself, tries to lead, to break free, she cries or withdraws, or accuses him of being too cold. And so he stays, not out of love, but out of guilt. This is emotional enmeshment, not intimacy. This is mothering, not partnership. Jung's insight was brutal. The man who remains unconscious of the feminine within himself is doomed to be ruled by it in others. In other words, if you don't meet your own inner softness, your feelings, needs, vulnerability, you will be owned by the first woman who offers to carry it for you. And that's how the shadow feminine takes control. Not through cruelty, but through the unconscious contract. I will give you emotional safety if you give up your soul. Now, here comes the hardest part. Many women do this without knowing it, because they too are possessed by their own animus, the masculine archetype in women, or by generational patterns of wounded femininity. They may have been taught that love means rescuing, that being needed means being valuable, that control is the only way to protect themselves, so they love the man into submission, and then resent him for becoming passive, lost, emotionally limp. And the man, he either wakes up or withers. Some eventually leave, others stay and decay. But either way, if he hasn't faced the shadow of the feminine, he will repeat the pattern, again and again. Different face, same abyss. The feminine shadow doesn't announce itself, it smiles, it strokes your hair, it waits for you to hand over your power willingly. And you will, if you've never looked at the part of yourself that wants to be devoured. Because make no mistake, she only has power when you don't know you gave it to her. Let's not pretend this is easy. Once a man sees the shadow, once he realizes that what he thought was love was often projection, addiction, unconscious longing, he doesn't feel enlightened. He feels broken, because now he knows. He wasn't betrayed by her. He was betrayed by the part of himself he refused to meet. And worse, he has to go back and reclaim what he gave away. Not just his power, his soul. This is the journey Jung called individuation, not spiritual awakening. Not finding a soulmate, but becoming whole. It is brutal work, because you're not just confronting women, you're confronting your own wounds, fantasies, and failures to grow up. Let's lay it bare. The modern man is not just afraid of women. He's afraid of his own vulnerability. He's never met his anima, the feminine within him, so he projects her onto others and chases them like a starving dog chasing God. He wants a woman to soothe him, nurture him, tell him who he is. But what he really wants is permission to feel, and he's too ashamed to admit it. So what does integration look like? It starts with solitude, not isolation, not be a lone wolf and grind 24/7 nonsense. No, it means sitting with your emptiness, your longing, your anger at women. That's really anger at yourself. You stop blaming her. You stop trying to fix her, win her, own her, or save her. You ask, what part of me made her necessary? And that's where the real work begins. You look at your wounds, the mother who was emotionally absent, the girl in high school who broke your heart, the women you idealized because you couldn't love yourself. You stop romanticizing your trauma. You realize she wasn't an angel, you weren't a victim. You both were unconscious. Then comes the hardest part. You meet your own anima, not in a woman, but in dreams, symbols, feelings, art, music, silence. She doesn't come like Aphrodite on a clamshell. She comes in grief, in longing, in the ache of unfulfilled desires. She is your muse, yes, but she is also your mirror. She shows you what you've ignored, the parts of you that feel too tender, too emotional, too feminine to face. But if you do not face them, you will spend your whole life chasing them in other people. Here's the irony. Only a man who has met his anima can truly love a woman. Why? Because he no longer needs her to complete him. He can admire her beauty without worshiping it. He can hear her emotions without drowning in them. He can witness her strength without fearing his own weakness. He doesn't try to save her. He walks beside her. Because now he has his own inner feminine, his own source of soul, feeling, intuition. He doesn't chase goddesses. He creates with them. This is what Jung meant by integration. Not rejection of the feminine, nor submission to it, but union, a sacred balance. Not between man and woman, but between masculine and feminine within. And yet, there's a cost. The man who integrates his anima no longer fits into society's neat boxes. He's too soft for the macho world, too rational for the spiritual crowd, too clear-eyed to worship women, too reverent to degrade them. He walks alone for a while, but not as a victim, not as a monk, as a man who no longer needs to prove he's a man. And that's when something strange happens. Women stop testing him. Because there's nothing to test. He's not seeking approval. He's not playing roles. He's just there, present, whole, real. And in that presence, the right woman appears. Not to complete him, but to join him. You see, the final phase of integration isn't about avoiding women. It's about being strong enough to see them clearly and still choose to love. Not blindly, not desperately, but consciously. And that, Jung would say, is where real eros begins. Not the fever dream obsession of the anima projected, but the sacred fire between two conscious beings. It's not dramatic, it's not cinematic, but it is real. And that's the only kind of love worth building your life around. If you ignore the dark side of women, you're really ignoring the dark side of yourself. And if you run from her shadow, you'll spend your life possessed by it. But if you have the courage to descend into your own unconscious, you will find her there, not as a demon, not as a goddess, but as your soul's forgotten twin, waiting to be made whole. We began this journey with a warning from Jung. A man who ignores the dark side of women destroys himself. But here's the twist. He never meant that women would destroy you. He meant that your illusion of them would, because the feminine, like the unconscious, is not evil. It is dangerous only when misunderstood. She is not your enemy. She is your mirror. We live in an age where men are told to fear being weak, to fear being soft, to fear women. And when that fear is repressed, it doesn't disappear. It projects. Men call women manipulative because they've never faced the part of themselves that manipulates. They call women emotional because they've buried their own grief beneath layers of performance. They blame the feminine for seducing them when it was their own unintegrated anima that begged to be seduced. Let's go deeper. What if every woman you're drawn to is just a fragment of yourself? What if she's not your soulmate, but your symbol? Not there to love you, but to show you what you refuse to love in yourself. That's why the feminine is so terrifying to the unconscious man. She doesn't just offer love, she offers a reckoning. In her eyes, he doesn't just see beauty, he sees his own incompleteness. You thought she was your fantasy, but she was really your teacher. Every heartbreak was a lesson. Every obsession, a pointer. Every betrayal, a map back to the places in you that still bleed. You called it her darkness, but it was always yours. This is the great trap of the psyche. To think the battle is outside, to think she is the problem, to think healing means avoiding toxic women, to think wisdom means becoming emotionally invincible. That's ego, dressed in spiritual robes. The real journey is to let yourself be destroyed, not by her, by the truth she reflects. You remember the myth of Narcissus? The man who stared into the water and fell in love with his own reflection? That wasn't vanity. It was ignorance. He didn't know it was him. That's what most men do with women. They fall in love with their own reflection in her eyes, their own projected anima, their own dreams of being wanted, mothered, worshipped, healed, and then they drown. Not because she was cruel, but because they mistook the mirror for the truth. So what's the way out? Not rejection, not resentment, not going monk mode and running from all connection. No, that's just another illusion. The way out is to see her clearly, not as savior, not as siren, not as scapegoat, but as a being, equal, autonomous, mysterious, and more importantly, to see yourself through her without confusing the reflection for the soul. Jung wrote, "The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed." This is the purpose of the feminine, not to comfort you, to transform you, not into a better man, but into a real one, whole, conscious, free. Let me leave you with this final paradox. You are not destroyed by the dark side of women. You are destroyed by your refusal to look at it, because in doing so, you refuse to look at yourself. You fear her chaos because you haven't made peace with your own. You fear her depth because you've never dived into yours. You fear being controlled because you've never learned to govern the forces within. So when Jung said, "A man who ignores the dark side of women destroys himself," he wasn't warning you about her. He was warning you about your shadow and your need to keep her angelic innocence soft, because the moment she becomes real, you are forced to become real too. What if the woman you fear is just the part of you still waiting to be seen? And what if your salvation is hidden in the very thing you've spent your life running from? Not her body, not her love, but the mirror of your own soul.